Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. It's a special webinar on AI and inclusive human rights frameworks for new technologies, where we're really trying to ask about the ways in which human rights frameworks can be the starting point for the creation of new tech and innovation. And I'm really excited because there's a thought-provoking and exciting conversation ahead of us today with really brilliant panelists. And we'll also bring into the table more questions that need to be asked and answered in order to harness the outstanding capabilities of AI with its promise, whether it's dystopia or utopia. And can we actually think about human rights frameworks with their ability to bring us into the middle ground? And so given the special context of our AI4D knowledge synthesis webinars with their foundation on gender and inclusion, we will start with the landscape, bringing forward the Maputo Protocol, which we believe to be extremely relevant to the new emerging technologies at hand. And for this, we will hear from the brilliant Michelle Onzili. Michelle is a lawyer, tech policy professional, and consultant on the AI4D team. Her primary areas of interest are the impacts of internet communications on democratic practices, data ethics, artificial intelligence, and the public digital sphere. And then we will hear from our first brilliant speaker, Dr. Angela Ndaka from GRAIN. Dr. Angela Ndaka is the Executive Director of the Center for African Epistemic Justice and the National Consultant on Gender and Youth Integration in Digitization, as well as a sociologist examining intersection of sustainable AI techno-futures. So without further ado, I would really love to invite Michelle to perhaps tell us a bit more and give an overview on the Maputo Protocol. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you so much. So I think the first thing that I'd want to highlight and point out is that the Maputo Protocol is the intersection between two very interesting human rights documents, and that is CEDAW, the Convention Against the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and the Africa Human Rights Charter. So basically what happened is 1979 and 1981, these different charters were adopted, and essentially what happened was there was a lack of specificity when it came to Africa and African women's rights. So the Maputo Protocol appeared as a result of grassroots movements, and its intention in 2003 was supposed to have both a retrospective and a futuristic approach. And this futuristic approach is what we see mirrored in the AI4D work and in the AI4D mission statement, and as well as the Allied A+ Alliance Declaration. So essentially what happened was that they realized that African women have specific needs and specific rights that needed to be paid attention to, that were different from what was articulated in both the aforementioned human rights instruments documents. And so essentially what we got was the adoption of a human rights instrument that stated specifically that there was a genuine fight against FGM, that women needed to be presented in a positive cultural context, and it also addressed issues of polygamy and issues of polyandry. So, and that was something that was unique to it because that was issues that were uniquely African in nature. So if you look at it and you look at the intersection of the Maputo Protocol and the work that has been done by AI4D, you can kind of contextualize it roughly under four headings. So the first is the elimination of harmful practices. Essentially, what the protocol addressed was that women's roles have been stereotyped in society, and this negatively affects their perceived status. So in data sets and in databases, you see the reflection of these societal biases towards women. In AI4D's fourth learning brief, they actually noted that these harmful practices are leading to gender stereotypes being embedded in virtual assistants, translation software, image recognition systems, among others. And so even when you think about the algorithmic origins of bias, bias is linked to a failure of society to transcend its stereotypical depiction of women. And so that failure reflects in algorithmic outcomes. And so this is a direct linkage between the Maputo Protocol and AI4D. It also addresses the participation in decision-making processes. So one of the things that is interesting about feminist AI is it's largely based on a participatory approach. So it's not just women's choices, which have been ignored in general and are still under threat, but also absorbs women's knowledge, such as indigenous knowledge, that has been taken for granted as essential. So what we need to do is to put deliberate effort into counting women and girls. And so this goes throughout the data pipeline. And the protocol on this front also emphasizes the need for equal representation, which currently in AI and STEM is unequal. There's a general representation of 22% of women in AI. And AI4D research also notes that barriers to women's participation intersects with additional barriers. So like racism, colonialism, ableism, and women's leadership aligns with normative human rights standards and principles. And the only way that you can get enhanced quality of research and better AI development is if you enhance the right to participation. So in addition to that, there's also education and training. Basically, what the protocol emphasizes is that women's and girls' rights to education needs to be preserved and protected because currently it's under threat due to violence, girls being forced to drop out, being led into early marriages. And so essentially what happens is that you have documents and instruments like the AI Inequality Human Rights Toolbox, which has a goal of working with an awareness of the public good and creating technology aware of and in line with human rights. So what we have in these instruments is this merging, not just of the fact that women and girls need education and training, particularly in STEM fields, but a practical approach to how they're going to get that training.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And I guess my follow-up question would be, based on this context and based on this knowledge at hand, how do you think communities and social scientists, as well as technologists, can leverage the protocol to make more human rights based AI?
So one of the interesting things about this protocol is that it emphasizes the need for a positive cultural context. So what that means is that women need to exist and thrive in a cultural context where their value is seen, where their contributions are seen, where their needs are recognized, and where they're actually actualized. So we all know the failures of the Google search engine and generative AI that denote women in an inferior cultural state. So, for example, if you fill in, man is to dash as woman is to dash, it might say man is to doctor as woman is to nurse, or man is to professional as woman is to secretary, and something that is, and those studies have been conducted to already show that generative AI has this sexist lens. So that what we're trying to do and what the FAIR Network and AI4D is trying to do is to combat this using different cohorts and different models, basically including things like an exploration of how AI and digital public goods for gender justice could contribute to better outcomes for girls, a practical approach to ensuring the development of AI from a feminist lens, etc. So what the protocol does is it lays down a guideline. So there's a bedrock, an equality bedrock. And when you look at it from the digital context, it ensures, one, that the raw data that you get is as input for today's tech is as free from bias and discrimination as possible. It also lays down different considerations for women in the workplace, women in marriages, women in education, and clarifies the dangers that are posed to them in these contexts. So it acts as a beacon for developers to maintain awareness of the learned biases that are threatening the accurate and fair function of tech. And so the way that you can use them is to use them as that beacon and as that guideline, because once you understand what the real and perceived dangers of discrimination in tech are, you can only work to eliminate them.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for this really great overview. And I have so many questions, especially when it comes to accountability, but also contextualization and implementation, and how to keep the Maputo Protocol in mind when putting together different technologies for good and public good. But I'll leave those questions for the discussion parts. And I really want to also open the floor to Dr. Angela Ndaka. And I forgot to mention Dr. Angela Ndaka's biography is very extensive. She's an amazing sociologist and feminist thinker. So please check out her LinkedIn profile to get an overview of all her writings and all of her work. So Angela, I really want to start the conversation with you with a particular questions and sort of taking a step back, which is what does it really mean to have human rights on the African continent, and can we be thinking with human rights framework that are in place today when it comes to the reflection of technologies and how we understand human rights?
Yeah, thank you so much, Amina, for this invitation, and thanks everyone for attending this. Yeah, I'll start my conversation by first talking about what does it mean to be human, and because when we talk about human rights, we've got to start with what it means to be human. And for me, being human is this person who has a past, present, and future, who holds knowledges that are legitimate to them, and who is a legitimate knower of something, whether it is acknowledged globally, locally, regionally, or not, but they are legitimate by themselves. They are situated in certain spaces, and they are situated in unique cultures which have norms and practices and values that shape those cultures. But then again, also, being that human, you have your own material culture outside what is imposed or transposed to you by the world that is external to you. But again, that person has what we would call basic human rights, like rights to privacy, rights to economic thriving, and rights to expressing themselves in a way that is comfortable to them. So for me, in the era of data, AI, and emerging digital technologies, having human rights goes beyond what has been conceptualized as rights. And I think that is why we are expanding further to think in terms of how do we expand frameworks of human rights. For example, digital technologies are invading in what we call economic space. And there is a lot of invisible economic polarization. So for me, having human rights in the digital age means having your economic rights intact. And that requires what we call data value, being able to define the value for data that you're giving in this particular digital spaces, being able also to talk in terms of how accessible are these particular spaces for me. How is it accessible? How is data accessible for me? How am I able to control how the conversations around my data are going? Because whenever I contribute data in the digital spaces, whether I am contributing as a farmer, or I'm contributing as a social actor, or I'm contributing even through publications or through my intellectual work, that data goes in that particular space. And that should have some level of control concerning it, how it's valued, how that value is compensated, and also how it is going to be used in the end space. I need to be able to define whether it can be used to transact by someone else, and what benefits can be able to come back to me. And those are economic rights that I would like to talk about, but there are many more economic rights that go beyond that. But then other parts of rights in the digital spaces would be social rights, or epistemic right and epistemic rights. Social rights are rights not to be discriminated. And because we've seen a lot of discrimination happening around data biases, inherent design biases, but also there are other forms of discrimination that are happening that Michelle just talked about. But more importantly, there's been a lot of epistemic injustices in terms of how recognizable or how articulated are knowledges that are existing in elsewhere places like Africa, or a grassroots community that does not exist in digital spaces. How are their knowledges being articulated in these particular digital spaces? How are they recognized as part of being human, living in this particular globe or living in the planet? And how are their knowledges existing or not existing within the digital spaces likely going to discriminate them or to alienate them or to remove them from either the benefits that are going to come with the digital technologies? And those are some of the hard questions that we need to start asking. And the last part of rights that I want to talk about would be environmental rights. I know there has been a lot of hype around uh, positioning AI and positioning digital technologies as green, as tech that is going to be solving environmental problems. But recently, with the emergence of generative AI, there has been a shift in terms of increase of greenhouse gas emissions. And we are not just talking about greenhouse gas emission, but we're also talking about many other emerging issues around the environment, like key waste, like exploitation of rare metals, and many other conversations, including also the water, copious usage of water by the AI data centers. And part of this conversation, people or many people may say that, oh, it is not impacting you or it is impacting another person. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about global warming, we're talking about the globe is warming as a result of someone emitting certain gas. Recently, I was reading an article that Microsoft emissions have increased to 30% due to generative AI alone. And that is only one company. And I'm wondering how much of environmental accountability are we getting from the big companies like Google, from big companies like IBM and these other digital companies, but also the other smaller companies that are emerging in this particular space. And so environmental rights, there will be a person sitting somewhere who is struggling with issues of global warming and climate change, who has no idea what Microsoft and Google and the other companies are doing and how much they are emitting and the accountabilities around that. And those are some of the issues around environmental rights that we need to start talking about. So having rights mean co-defining rights together, not just having certain entities who are dominant, defining what rights mean or what human rights mean and whose rights we are talking about. So we need to start co-evolving together and thinking together in terms of whose human rights are we talking about in this particular conversation. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Angela. And I guess I have a follow-up question in terms of do you think that human rights frameworks are focusing merely on the technical outputs as opposed to the larger assemblage, which you sort of hinted to in this answer, in terms of what is actually happening in a different supply chain or in the different ways in which data is extracted throughout different parts on the continent when it comes to large monopolies? So if you could speak on that, please.
Yeah, the wider conversation about human rights, and especially in relation to hair, if you sit in the boardrooms, I call them boardrooms conversations, you will hear most of the push of human rights is very much economic, and it's pushing for certain markets against other markets and all that. And you find that dominant players around these particular spaces will talk about how they will be excluded and how they hold their data and how they are probably keeping that data waiting to be given some particular access or rights in that particular aspect. But then when you think in terms of broadly thinking, there are people who are not necessarily part of the conversations that are happening in the boardroom that actually have human rights, and they have to be defined. The frameworks have to be defined, putting such centering into everyone who is going to be impacting AI and who is going to be impacted by AI. And some of the harder questions that we would be asking would be like, if I am part of this particular globe, most features are being defined, regardless of where I am in the value chain. Am I being included by just being pulled on board? Or am I also being included in terms of being a part of the decision making or a part of deciding how these particular human rights are being defined? And that is why we need to go beyond just inclusion in terms of numbers or inclusion in terms of building capacity, but also talking about inclusion in terms of defining access, inclusion of in terms of defining awareness. For example, I need to be aware what is AI. I need to be aware how AI is going to impact me, whether I'm in the value chain in the market or not. Because at the end of the day, I am going to be at the bottom of the barrel in this particular value chain by default. And AI will impact me negatively or positively, depending on how the human rights are being defined along the value chains from the bottom person to the top person. And so frameworks need to start thinking in terms of how inclusion needs to be thought through without necessarily just thinking in people from the dimensions of marginalized versus unmarginalized, but also picking the different marginalizations in layers and discussing them in those particular layers. For example, if I'm being marginalized from the technology design point of view, then that layer needs to be addressed from that layer. But if the marginalization is happening at the market space, then that needs to be defined in that particular space. But then integrating and entangling all these parts together in terms of forming what is a human right, or defining what is a human right actually, and who is it benefiting, and is everyone part of these particular frameworks, or are they frameworks that are only addressing rights of particular people against others?
Absolutely. Yes. Really excited to the conversation. I think these were really, really critical points. And I would like to also invite into the conversation Winston Ojenge, who's an AI expert with newfound excitement with ethics of AI, where he's currently involved in several research works. He's a researcher at the African Center for Technology Study, ACTS, and heads the Digital Economy program. Winston, welcome to the conversation. I have a few questions to ask you, and I hope you're well. I would really like to know from you in what ways you have seen human rights or human rights frameworks apply to the different AI4D projects which you have supervised and which you've helped brainstorm and bring to life.
Okay. First, I'd like to state apologies. My calendar was indicating as a Google Meet link, and I couldn't see this. But someone brought my attention to this. I'm also having some little background noise. I hope that it won't affect the session. We're in a hotel in some event. That question is certainly very powerful. But I need to mention, number one, that a human rights inside or within artificial intelligence is still a fairly new concept. And there's a lot of pushback because most AI researchers and developers feel that human rights is out to stifle innovation and performance and sometimes even profits. So it's therefore a very alien concept within our continent, particularly. However, within the AI4D Africa Scholarship Program or project, I would like to state here that when we started in March 2021, we were dealing with the PhD candidates in AI and postdocs in AI, and the PhD candidates was being supervised by professors who are experts of AI, that they were totally unaware about ethics of AI and human rights. It was an alien concept, and but we had to struggle within that project to give them short courses in gender and AI, ethics of AI, human rights, etc. But we clearly saw that this was not registering. And the beauty is now that the Gender Consortium, Women at the Table, one of the members of the Gender Consortium, came up with an idea that they could support us in a small budget to be able to convert these short courses into project-based projects. And that has bore results clearly, because they were now trying to review their research studies in AI against the AI and human rights toolbox, and see where they were breaching human rights. And quite a number of them saw that. But you know, why I believe that they're coming on board is more about the fact that they're academicians, they're researchers, they are naturally people who are looking out, who are hungry for new knowledge. So it's certainly of interest to them. Another thing is they're also in the grant, international development grant space, and they know that clearly that in future it would be difficult to access grants around research of AI unless you are compliant to human rights. So for that reason, they have an interest, and we are seeing that registering. However, there's another group that is not the researchers, the academics, but the developers, the profit-motivated developers. We are already involved in, we are co-leading a global partnership for AI project, JIPE. They did their first installment last year. What they were doing is looking for AI developers across all the continents and trying to enable them, to support them to scale their solutions ethically. And they were using a mentoring system where they were bringing experts together, and these experts were being allocated to teams, development teams, and the mentors would then mentor the teams to scale their solutions ethically. We are yet to see how religiously they would want to learn how to scale ethically AI solutions, but we expect that naturally they are profit motivated, and there's always that feeling that ethics is stifling profits and performance. So it's something that it's a question that I would precisely be able to answer toward the end of this year. However, we see that there are youth that are enthusiastic already. They're showing lots of enthusiasm. So the bottom line, therefore, is that there's been little evidence, but it's starting to build up. We're seeing instances of this.
Thank you so much. And I guess my follow-up question to that would be if you could perhaps speak a little bit more about the AI and equality human rights toolbox and the essential questions extracted from it, and whether these questions and the human rights framework should be the starting point for the creation of new tech and innovation. I know that in the past you had spoken about different grassroots and community-based research that some of your students in the rural areas and in agriculture, and so different places to gather questions from when it comes to building human-centered technologies?
The toolbox is, we have interacted very closely with the toolbox, and it is clearly work still in progress. But what we love about it, what I feel is it's his power, strong points is that it is asking the right questions. It is following the entire developmental value chain or development cycle of AI. It is clearly starting from where questions are supposed to start, and that is the problem definition. It's compelling you, it's indicating to you as a developer that you need to find the user community and start developing or identifying or defining the problem that the AI is going to solve within that community. And you can see the first questions of Objective 1 is clearly trying to explore that. Then it asks questions about data collection, which is stage 2. And I need to mention here that most of our AI developers, at least the ones I've interacted with, skip stage 1, problem definition. They always go to data collection, and therefore data it's very easy, likely that you'll collect data poorly because you didn't define the problem correctly. So the toolbox asks questions about data collection and the team, constitution of that team that is going to collect the data. Then it goes to ask about model development, that is training of the machine learning algorithm using the data. What did you do and what did you not do? Then it talks about the deployment or the after activities once the model has been developed, how you utilize it. So that shows you, therefore, that it's a powerful tool, and we are certainly going to leverage it too among a few other tools in the GPA, or Global Partnership for AI project, that we are co-leading. We are co-leading the African track. Then coming to the later question, where you're saying whether this kind of framework, these kind of questions are essential. It is very important that these questions are asked. And let me again give you one example. In Africa, for instance, if you go to a rural farmer, why you need to define and why such a toolbox should be asking questions about problem definition right with the community, which are the users, is because you can't, for instance, assume that you need a tool that is going to predict rainfall. It's an assumption to most people that every farmer wants rainfall prediction. But you could be having a set of farmers that live along the lake or live along the rivers, who have the ability to do simple irrigation, manual irrigation, by just scooping water using buckets and pouring on each plant. And that happens along the water bodies so much. So when you give such a farmer a rain prediction AI tool, then you can see where there's the disconnect. So you need to ask them what exactly is their problem, and you'll be surprised that maybe all they want is the ability to identify diseases. And when you are doing the right toolbox, then should now be asking a very elaborate toolbox. Then you should be asking in Africa questions like that user community, what vernacular were they? And this team that was collecting the data, were they collecting the data in vernacular? Because then you could lose a few of them and not be able to constitute the problem correctly because of just maybe language issues. So there are many things then as you go from one community to the next that you want to, but certainly you must start from problem definition, then go to data collection, and then go to model development, etc.
Thank you so much. I want to ask everyone who's also joining us to send through questions. I hope we'll have a Q&A towards the last 10 minutes. But before that, I think there's a specific question that I want to ask both Winston and Angela. In terms of the kinds of conversations or dialogues that need to be had between gender experts on techpreneurs aiming to solve critical human rights questions, or rather, the question between gender experts and technopreneurs who are aiming to solve critical human rights questions. And how can we actually bridge the gap between technical skills and human rights-based knowledge within the African landscape? I think Angela's internet might have dropped, but Winston, if you'd like to begin with the question.
So the connection between human rights and technical studies or development around AI. There's a big question that need to be asked, and if the right questions are asked, then it would be possible to get the right answers. And I think that could make a big difference in the space of R&D AI. That is, could there be a nexus between profits or between human rights and performance and profits? Because AI developers and even researchers want performance. Of course, developers want profits too, but even the academics want performance. But is there a nexus? I suspect there is a nexus. Number one, if I go to the farmers to define the problem and collect data, and I collect biased data, meaning I don't sample that farmer community appropriately across the geography. You know, I have to touch base with each little geographical point within that location. I also have to touch base with all ages of the farmers. I have to touch base with the gender, both genders of the farmers, touch base with the different affluence levels of farmers. There's a farmer who is 1 acre, a farmer who is 10 acre, who has more resources, can afford farm inputs. So I must touch base with all of them. The reason is because if I collect that data has no bias. And when I use it to develop predictive model, there would be a lot of accuracy. That particular model or solution will be very high performing because it can answer queries accurately of every type of farmer within that location. And that is basically what human rights is. Because when I sample appropriately and I collect views or data from every category of farmer, then I'm killing bias, but I'm also improving precision technically. So I believe that more studies should be done on that nexus, on that meeting point between human rights and the technique of AI.
Thank you, Winston. Angela, would you like to take on board that question? And I don't know if the internet is still good on your end.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, you can repeat the question for me because I ran offline.
Yes. I was really curious about your take on the kinds of conversations or dialogue that need to be had between gender experts and technopreneurs aiming to solve critical human rights questions.
From where I stand, I've been noticing a lot of conversations have been focusing on the technology development alone and trying to address issues of, for example, gender or even youth exclusion or even marginalized communities exclusion in terms of addressing the technology. But I feel like the conversations are broader than that, and they need to go beyond just thinking in terms of regulating that particular dialogue or those particular inequalities in tech alone. I want to give an example. As a continuation of actually what Winston was talking about. I've been researching in the farms and talking to different farmers concerning farms and technologies that are being developed for them, and some of the technologies are actually being used to help them predict the yields and predict what they are able to get and the benefits that they will get from the farms again. But then going beyond into those conversations, in our findings, we discovered that the same tech that is being used to help them predict yields within their farms, the same tech is being used against them in terms of how the entity that is controlling that tech. For example, if tech has been developed for a middle person in the value chain or a middle company in the value chain to help them be able to predict what a farmer is able to produce. Then that technology, that particular company uses the same information to ostracize farmers, depending on whether they deliver as per what technology predicted or not. And so you find that if a farmer, by any chance, if they were supposed to deliver 20 kilos of tea or 20 liters or 50 liters of milk, and they deliver less than that, then they start receiving threats to be removed from the market or to be kept out of that particular supply company because they did not deliver that. But no one cares about what is happening to this particular to these particular people. This violation of their rights of data that they do not know actually those particular entities have, because entities have received data from somewhere else, or they procured a certain tech company to collect the data for them and to create that technology that will predict that. So you can find that the human rights are being violated in very different way, other than just talking about the being included broadly, like having a gender parity or having a sort of like being able to access technology and all that. You find that even the access itself creates avenues of those who are in power to violate the rights of those who are not in power. So we need to start introducing power-laced conversations, which we can actually assess and have conversation around who has power over who and what kind of power is being built by introduction of this technology, because the technology itself may be fair, but introduction of it can introduce new power dynamics that introduces new kinds of rights violation within this particular space and all that. So we need to start thinking in terms of inclusion beyond numbers, inclusion beyond the traditional parameters of what we used to call equality, parity, and all that. And going beyond there and talking about the people, the entities, the companies behind these particular spaces and behind these particular technologies, and how are they using these technologies to violate or enhance these particular rights. So increasing of awareness of people of what is actually happening to them and happening in their farms, in their social spaces, is very important for us to be able to create tech and also to create social technical systems that enhance human rights. Thank you.
Angela, you go fast or I go? Angela, go fast.
You can go fast.
Okay.
Men fast.
Okay. Very quickly, what Angela says, I totally agree with, and we are converging. And it comes at deployment. Remember the entire AI cycle. problem definition, etc., until deployment. So deployment is the use of it. That should also be ethical and should be studied. What I would tell the funder is that a lot of their money could be coming in to support studies, research and development of AI. There should be, I believe that there should be some kind of arrangement. I don't know how hard it would be yet, but it should be some kind of arrangement or a platform on which all the grantees of such monies that want to conduct research and development of AI, again, however light it is, to ensure that research and development of AI is carried with human rights or within the guardrails of human rights, and so that then the solutions go out. They do not pose risks to the users. Because this is easier said than done, because then they would have to develop very powerful and very quality toolboxes that are standard that everyone must use as they develop their AI solution. Thank you.
Yeah, I think my point to the donors and people who are funding technology, I feel there's been, in Africa particularly, I feel like there has been an over focus on the material outputs of technology, and we have lost a track in terms of focusing on the wider socio-technical assemblage, because it is tech as it is, and AI and the future technologies that are emerging, they are not just material outputs. They are actually expressions of power. And when we focus very much on just produce technology, we remove ourselves from focusing on how power is being exchanged or being mediated in these particular spaces. And as you have heard us talk about it, it's a mediation of power starts from the top and it mediates down with someone oppressing another in a way or the other and all that. So thinking in terms of also addressing the power dynamics that are emerging within the development, but also the funding itself, who is funding who, and how do they even define the milestones and the objectives of those particular the particular funding, so that we are not having some people who have unfettered access to this technology and the data in a way that they can do and achieve what they want to achieve, and others who cannot achieve what they want to achieve simply because there is a power inequality between. So thinking in terms of the bigger assemblage and what is happening, who is being affected by who, but also bringing everyone into the conversation so that we are not developing tech for the society as if they are passive recipients of this particular tech, because tech itself is active, is an active socio-technical system. But also, again, the society is also active. And when they are active, they have to co-evolve together. If they don't co-evolve together, then we are going to be either having a problem of where tech is developed, which does not solve any problem, or investments that are going, which are a mismatch to the society, or tech that is going to harm the society for whom it is being developed for. And so we have to think in terms of how do we have society and technology co-evolve together like two active entities, but also the power dynamics around them being addressed proactively and intentionally, so that we can have better tech for Africa in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this really extensive answer. And I think it really covers also the accountability part, which I had a couple of questions, or which I mentioned earlier with after Michelle's presentation on the Maputo Protocol. I'm not sure if Michelle's internet is still holding on. Okay, yeah, I think Michelle's having problem with intermittent problems with the network. But this is also just then to close up and to say thank you for tuning in today to this really exciting conversation. It will be up on YouTube, so you'll be able to rewatch it again. But I also would like to invite you to have a look at the other AI4D knowledge synthesis webinars, which have taken place in the past, and where a lot of other brilliant and exquisite African thinkers and philosophers, as well as theorists and experts, have come to speak about how they center feminist methodologies in their practice and praxis when thinking about the impact of artificial intelligence on the continent. Thank you, and we hope to see you in our next webinar. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the guests Angela Ndaka and Winston Nojenge.